Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The backstage area of the Majestic Theater hummed with quiet energy as the last of the stagehands and actors filed out for the evening. Weston, his toolbox in hand, made his final rounds, checking the electrical systems one last time before locking up. The smell of grease paint and sawdust lingered in the air, a familiar scent that always stirred something deep within him. As the heavy stage door clanged shut behind the last departing crew member, Weston felt a familiar tingle of excitement. He was alone at last. His eyes darted to the costume room door, its tempting presence calling to him like a siren song. He hesitated, fingers brushing against the cool metal of the doorknob. This was risky, he knew, but the theater was empty. The night was young, and that burning curiosity inside him refused to be silenced any longer. With a deep breath, Weston pushed open the door and slipped inside the costume room. Racks upon racks of colorful garments greeted him, a treasure trove of silk, sequins, and possibility. His heart raced as he ran his hands over the various fabrics, marveling at their textures. His gaze fell upon a deep crimson corset adorned with delicate black lace. Beside it hung a matching floor-length gown that shimmered in the dim light. A pair of glossy black stilettos completed the ensemble, beckoning to him from their perch on a nearby shelf. "Just this once," Weston whispered to himself, carefully lifting the corset from its hanger. With trembling hands, he began to undress, folding his work clothes neatly and setting them aside. The corset was a challenge to don alone, but he managed to lace it up tightly, gasping slightly as it cinched his waist. The dress came next, sliding over his head in a whisper of silk. Weston turned to face the full-length mirror propped against the wall. The person staring back at him was a stranger, waist accentuated by the corset's rigid boning. He twirled experimentally, watching the skirt flare out around him. A giddy laugh escaped his lips as he slipped his feet into the heels, wobbling slightly as he adjusted to the new height. He took a few tentative steps, gaining confidence with each click of the heels against the hardwood floor. For several minutes, Weston lost himself in the fantasy. He strutted back and forth, hips swaying, imagining himself on stage beneath the bright lights. It felt liberating, exhilarating, like he was finally allowing a part of himself to breathe that had long been suffocated. The spell was broken by a sudden, heart-stopping click. Weston whirled around, nearly losing his balance in the unfamiliar shoes. To his horror, he realized the costume room door had swung shut behind him. He lunged for the handle, twisting it frantically, but it refused to budge. "No, no, no!" he muttered, yanking harder. But it was no use. The door had locked automatically when it closed. His keys, along with his regular clothes and phone, were still inside the room. Panic rose in Weston's chest as the reality of his situation sank in. He was locked out, dressed in full costume, with no way to change back or call for help. The theater was empty, and he knew from experience that the night janitor wouldn't arrive for hours. He leaned against the wall, mind racing. There was a back exit near the dressing rooms. If he could just make it there without being seen, he could slip out and figure out his next move. It was risky, but what choice did he have? Taking a deep breath, Weston straightened his spine and smoothed down the front of the dress. If he was going to do this, he'd have to commit fully. He'd have to become the character he'd inadvertently created. With faltering steps that grew more confident by the moment, Weston made his way down the darkened hallway. The click of his heels echoed ominously in the empty theater. He kept his chin high, channeling the poise and grace of the actresses he'd watched from the wings so many times before. As he rounded the corner towards the exit, a beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness. Weston froze, heart pounding. The night janitor must have arrived early. "Hello?" a gruff voice called out. "Someone there!" Weston's mind raced. He couldn't be discovered like this. His job, his reputation, everything would be at risk. In that moment of panic, an idea struck him. He cleared his throat and pitched his voice higher. "Oh, I'm so sorry," he called out in a breathy, feminine tone.
I'm with the touring company. I think I left my purse backstage. I hope you don't mind me popping back in to grab it."
The janitor's flashlight beam lowered.
"No problem, miss. Just be quick about it, all right? I'm locking up soon."
"Of course, thank you so much," Weston replied, relief flooding through him. He quickened his pace, the exit door now in sight. As he pushed it open, the cool night air hit him like a shock. The street beyond was mercifully quiet, with only a few passers-by hurrying along the sidewalk. Weston took a deep breath, steadying himself. He could do this. He just needed to make it home without drawing attention. With as much confidence as he could muster, Weston stepped out onto the sidewalk. The concrete was rough beneath the thin soles of his heels, but he forced himself to walk naturally, hips swaying slightly with each step. A group of young women passed by, chattering excitedly. One of them smiled at Weston, giving an appreciative nod at his outfit. "Cute dress," she called out. Weston felt a rush of warmth at the compliment. "Thank you," he replied, his voice still pitched high. The interaction left him feeling oddly elated. They had seen him as just another woman on the street. His disguise was working. As he continued down the sidewalk, Weston found himself relaxing into the role. He window shopped as he passed storefronts, admiring his reflection in the glass. The person staring back at him was elegant, poised, beautiful even. It was a startling realization. A cab slowed beside him, the driver leaning out the window. "Need a ride, miss?" For a moment, Weston was tempted, but the thought of climbing into a confined space with a stranger while dressed like this sent a spike of anxiety through him. He shook his head, smiling apologetically.
"No, thank you. I'm just enjoying the evening air."
The cab pulled away, leaving Weston to continue his journey home. With each block he walked, his confidence grew. He found himself adopting mannerisms he'd observed in the actresses at the theater, tucking a strand of hair behind his ear, adjusting his posture to accentuate his figure. As he waited at a crosswalk, a man in a sharp suit approached, standing a bit too close for comfort.
"You look lovely tonight,"
he said, his tone just shy of leering. "Can I buy you a drink?" Weston's heart raced, but he managed to keep his composure. "I'm flattered," he replied coolly, "but I'm afraid I'm spoken for." The light changed, and he strode across the street, leaving the man behind. The interaction left Weston feeling oddly empowered. He'd successfully navigated an uncomfortable situation, all while maintaining his cover. It was exhilarating, like being on stage in the most high-stakes performance of his life. As he neared his apartment building, a new dilemma presented itself. His keys were still locked in the costume room back at the theater. He'd have to buzz his roommate to let him in, and how could he possibly explain his current state? Weston hesitated outside the building, weighing his options. Just then, the door swung open as a neighbor exited. Without thinking, Weston flashed a smile and slipped inside before the door could close. He made his way up the stairs as quietly as possible, praying his roommate was either out or already asleep. As he reached his floor, he heard voices coming from inside their apartment. His roommate must have people over. Panic gripped him once more. He couldn't face a group of people like this. The charade would surely fall apart under such scrutiny. But he couldn't spend the night in the hallway either. An idea struck him. Mrs. Goldstein in 4B was always going on about her spare key collection. She insisted on having copies of all her neighbors' keys, just in case. It had seemed nosy at the time, but now it might be his salvation. Weston made his way to 4B, smoothing down his dress and taking a deep breath before knocking. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Mrs. Goldstein's bespectacled face. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, peering up at Weston curiously. Weston summoned his most charming smile. "I'm so sorry to bother you, Mrs. Goldstein. I'm a friend of Weston's. He asked me to stop by and grab something from his apartment, but I'm afraid I've forgotten my key. He mentioned you might have a spare?" Mrs. Goldstein's face lit up with recognition. "Oh, of course. Always happy to help a friend of Weston's.
Such a nice young man.
She disappeared into her apartment, returning moments later with a key.
Here you are, dear. Just slip it under my door when you're done.
Weston thanked her profusely, relief washing over him as he took the key. He made his way back to his own apartment, listening carefully at the door. The voices inside had quieted. Perhaps his roommate's guests had left. He unlocked the door as quietly as possible and slipped inside. The living room was mercifully empty, but he could hear movement coming from his roommate's bedroom. Weston darted into his own room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Finally alone, he leaned against the door, letting out a long, shaky breath. He'd done it. He'd made it home, navigating the city streets and social interactions, all while dressed as a woman. And not only had he survived the experience, part of him had thrived on it. Weston caught sight of himself in his bedroom mirror and paused, struck by his reflection. The person staring back at him was simultaneously familiar and foreign. The curve of his waist, the way the dress hugged his figure, the elegant line of his neck, it all came together to create an image that was undeniably feminine. With trembling hands, he began to remove the costume. As each piece came off, he felt a curious mix of relief and loss. The corset had left faint marks on his skin, a physical reminder of the evening's adventure. As he hung the dress carefully in his closet, hidden behind his everyday clothes, Weston knew this wouldn't be a one-time experience. The thrill of it, the way he'd felt in that dress, it had awakened something in him that couldn't be easily dismissed. He crawled into bed, mind whirling with the events of the night. As he drifted off to sleep, one thought kept circling through his mind. For a few hours, he had been someone else entirely, and that someone had felt more real, more authentic than he had in years. The next morning, Weston woke to the sound of his alarm, momentarily disoriented. As the events of the previous night came flooding back, he felt a mix of embarrassment and exhilaration. Had he really done that? Had he really walked the streets of the city, passing as a woman? He got ready for work in a daze, his movements automatic as his mind raced. How would he face his co-workers at the theater, knowing what he'd done? Would they somehow be able to tell? As he entered the theater that morning, Weston braced himself for something. Stares, whispers, any sign that his secret had been discovered. But everything was normal. The stage manager nodded at him as he passed. The actors warming up paid him no mind. It was as if nothing had changed, and yet, for Weston, everything had. He made his way to the costume room, heart pounding as he unlocked the door. There, neatly folded where he'd left them, were his work clothes from the night before. He quickly changed, stuffing the theater's costume into his bag to return later. Throughout the day, Weston found his mind wandering back to the previous night. The feel of the silk against his skin, the click of heels on pavement, the rush of successfully passing as female. It all replayed in his mind on a loop. During his lunch break, he found himself people-watching with new interest. He studied the women passing by, noting the way they walked, the subtle gestures they made. He found himself unconsciously mimicking some of these movements, testing how they felt. As the days passed, Weston's thoughts continued to be consumed by his experience. He began to notice things he'd never paid attention to before, the way clothing fit differently on various body types, the artistry of makeup application, the myriad ways women expressed their femininity. He started spending more time in front of the mirror at home, experimenting with his posture and mannerisms. He practiced pitching his voice higher, working on making it sound natural. Late at night, when his roommate was asleep, he would sometimes slip on the heels he'd kept from that night, practicing walking silently across his bedroom floor. At work, Weston found himself lingering in the costume room more often, running his hands over the various fabrics, imagining how they would feel to wear. He began to pay more attention to the actresses, studying their movements and interactions with a new appreciation. One afternoon, as he was adjusting the lighting for an upcoming show, one of the lead actresses approached him. "Weston, right?" she asked, smiling warmly. I was wondering if you could help me with something. Weston nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. Of course, what can I do for you? The actress, whose name was Melanie, explained that she was having trouble with one of her costume changes. It's this corset, she said, frustration evident in her voice. I can never seem to get it tight enough on my own, and it's affecting my performance. Weston felt a flutter of excitement.
I might be able to help with that,
he said, surprising himself with his eagerness.
I've picked up a few things about costume construction while working here.
Melanie looked relieved. Oh, would you? That would be amazing. I have a fitting in a few minutes if you're free. Weston agreed, following Melanie to one of the dressing rooms. As he helped her with the corset, he found himself sharing tips on how to breathe properly while wearing it, how to move to avoid discomfort. Melanie listened attentively, clearly impressed by his knowledge. Wow, Weston, she said as she admired the result in the mirror. You really know your stuff. Have you ever considered going into costume design? The question caught Weston off guard. He'd never considered it, but now that she mentioned it, I hadn't, he admitted, but it's an interesting idea. As he left the dressing room, Weston felt a new sense of possibility blooming within him. He'd always loved the theater, but he'd never imagined he could be part of it in a way that aligned so perfectly with his newfound interests. Over the next few weeks, Weston threw himself into learning everything he could about costume design. He borrowed books from the theater's library, watched online tutorials, and even started sketching his own designs in a notebook he kept hidden in his room. He also began to experiment more with his own appearance. He grew out his hair, explaining to curious coworkers that he was trying out a new look. He started using subtle moisturizers and skincare products, enjoying the way they made his skin feel softer, more feminine. One evening as he was leaving work, Melanie caught up with him. Hey, Weston, she said, slightly out of breath. A bunch of us are going out for drinks. Want to join? Weston hesitated. He'd always kept to himself at work, but something made him nod. Sure, he said. That sounds nice. At the bar, Weston found himself relaxing in the company of the actors and other crew members. As the night wore on and the drinks flowed, the conversation turned to personal lives. So, Weston, one of the actors asked, you got a girlfriend? Weston felt a flush creep up his neck. No, he said softly. No girlfriend. Boyfriend, then? Another chimed in, the question free of judgment. Weston shook his head. Neither, actually. I'm still figuring things out, I guess. To his surprise, this admission was met with understanding nods and supportive comments. Melanie placed a hand on his arm. Hey, we've all been there. The theater is a great place to explore who you are. As Weston made his way home that night, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he felt like he might be able to be honest about who he was, or at least who he was becoming. The next day, Weston made a decision. He approached the costume designer, a kind-faced woman named Eleanor, and asked if she would be willing to take him on as an apprentice. Eleanor was delighted by his interest, and soon Weston found himself spending his free time learning the ins and outs of costume creation. As weeks turned into months, Weston's life began to transform. His skills in costume design improved rapidly, and he found himself being given more responsibilities in the wardrobe department. At the same time, he continued to explore his own identity, gradually incorporating more feminine elements into his everyday appearance. He started wearing his hair in a softer style, invested in clothes that were more androgynous, and even began experimenting with subtle makeup. To his relief, his co-workers at the theater were largely supportive, or at least indifferent to these changes. One afternoon, as Weston was putting the finishing touches on a costume for the upcoming production, Eleanor approached him with an exciting proposition. Weston, she said, a twinkle in her eye, how would you feel about designing the costumes for the theater's next small production? It's a modern piece, very avant-garde. I think your fresh perspective would be perfect for it. Weston felt a thrill of excitement mixed with nervousness.
Are you sure? He asked. I mean, I'd love to, but I'm still learning.
Eleanor waved away his concerns. You have a natural talent, Weston, and more importantly, you understand the transformative power of costume. This could be a great opportunity for you. Weston agreed, throwing himself into the project with enthusiasm. As he sketched designs and selected fabrics, he found himself drawing on his own experiences. He understood now, in a way he never had before, how clothing could be a form of self-expression, a way to reveal or conceal aspects of oneself. As the production date neared, Weston's designs came to life. Watching the actors try on his creations, seeing how they transformed not just their appearances, but their entire demeanors, filled him with a sense of pride and accomplishment he'd never experienced before. The night of the premiere arrived, and Weston watched from the wings, heart pounding. As the curtain rose and the actors took the stage in his costumes, he felt a surge of emotion. This was more than just a job now. It was a calling. After the show, as the cast and crew celebrated the successful opening night, Weston found himself surrounded by congratulations and praise. Melanie hugged him tightly, exclaiming over the beautiful gown he'd designed for her character. In that moment, basking in the glow of his achievement, Weston felt truly seen for the first time. Not just as an electrician, or even as a costume designer, but as his whole self. Someone who understood the power of transformation, someone who was on a journey of self-discovery. As the night wound down, Weston found a quiet moment alone. He looked at his reflection in a nearby mirror, taking in the person he'd become. His hair fell in soft waves around his face, a touch of glitter at the corners of his eyes catching the light. He was wearing a flowing top over slim pants, an outfit that blurred the lines between masculine and feminine. For the first time, the person looking back at him in the mirror felt wholly, authentically him. It wasn't about passing as male or female anymore. It was about being true to himself, wherever that journey might lead. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.